The most dangerous secrets never begin with a gunshot. They begin with a phone that rings at 3 in the morning. Noah Whitmore never ignored a call from his employer, no matter the hour. Working as the personal legal secretary for Damian Cross meant living by a schedule no ordinary office worker would understand. Contracts arrived after midnight, emergency meetings appeared before sunrise, and every decision carried consequences that reached far beyond the skyline of Grayport City. Even so, when the shrill vibration of his phone shattered the silence at exactly 3 a.m., something felt different. The screen glowed in the darkness of his apartment, displaying a single familiar name. Damian Cross. Noah sat upright immediately, his heartbeat quickening for reasons he couldn't explain. Damian almost never called directly. Every instruction normally came through encrypted company channels or his chief of staff. A direct call meant something had gone terribly wrong. He answered before the second ring. For a moment, all he heard was quiet breathing mixed with distant traffic. Then Damian's calm, controlled voice broke the silence. "Noah, don't call the police." The words sounded measured, yet unusually strained, as though Damian were choosing each syllable with extraordinary care. Noah frowned. "Mr. Cross? What's happening? Where are you?" There was a faint metallic sound somewhere in the background, followed by what seemed like a car door closing. Damian glanced toward the dashboard where the secure communication indicator flashed an unfamiliar warning. If the line had already been intercepted, naming anyone could condemn them before sunrise. Every word now had to protect Noah rather than explain the truth. Damian's eyes briefly shifted toward the blinking display inside the vehicle. If the communication system had already been compromised, speaking anyone's name aloud could place the next target in immediate danger. He measured every word with extreme care. Noah waited for an answer, gripping the phone tighter. Instead, Damian spoke again, this time even more quietly. "There's something you need to." Damian stopped mid-sentence as another metallic sound echoed nearby. Whatever had interrupted him happened too quickly for him to finish the warning. The sentence ended abruptly. The line went dead. Noah stared at the screen, convinced the call had dropped. He tried calling back immediately. No answer. Again, straight to voicemail. He reached for his jacket, uncertainty replacing the last traces of sleep. Every instinct told him to ignore Damian's final instruction and contact emergency services anyway. Yet another part of him remembered years of watching Damian anticipate situations no one else could see. Damian never wasted words, and he certainly never panicked. If he had said not to call the police, there had to be a reason. Damian had spent 5 years teaching Noah that incomplete information could be more dangerous than silence. Trusting that instinct now felt impossible, yet ignoring it felt even worse. Noah stood frozen beside his apartment window, looking down at the rain-slicked streets 3 stories below. Grayport's neon lights reflected across the pavement, turning the city into a sea of fractured colors. Somewhere out there, the city's most influential alpha had vanished after a single unfinished sentence. Less than 20 minutes later, Noah's television interrupted its overnight programming with breaking news. The anchor's usually composed expression had been replaced by visible disbelief. Authorities had detained Damian Cross following an explosion at a private warehouse connected to Cross Strategic Holdings. 3 prominent Alpha executives had been confirmed dead during the incident, and investigators were treating the location as the center of an organized crime investigation. Video footage filled the screen. Police vehicles surrounded the property while reporters struggled to stay behind security barriers. Then the camera shifted. Damian stepped from the back of a black SUV wearing handcuffs, surrounded by officers. He neither resisted nor lowered his head. His expression remained almost impossibly calm despite the flashing cameras aimed at him from every direction. The headline beneath the footage appeared in bold letters. Mafia Alpha arrested before dawn. Noah felt the room tilt beneath him. That impossible phone call replayed inside his mind again and again. Don't call the police. There was no fear in Damian's voice. No plea for help. Only urgency. Only purpose. Noah knew the media had spent years calling Damian the city's most dangerous alpha, but he had also spent 5 years working beside the man, reviewing contracts, negotiating regulations unique to Alpha and Omega employment law, and watching Damian reject countless opportunities to exploit the legal system others believed he controlled. None of it matched what he was seeing now. Then another alert appeared on Noah's phone. Every access credential linked to Damien's executive office had been suspended under emergency legal authority. Company files were locked. Staff members were ordered not to communicate with investigators without legal counsel. Within seconds, another message arrived from an unknown encrypted sender. It contained only one sentence. If you value your future as an Omega, forget the call ever happened. Noah looked once more at the frozen image of Damien standing silently beneath the courthouse lights. Instead of fear, a single conviction settled into his heart. Whatever had happened before dawn, the truth had not been arrested with Damien. It was still out there, waiting for someone willing to find it. By sunrise, Grayport had already decided the story. Every news station replayed the same footage of Damien Cross leaving the police vehicle in handcuffs, while commentators confidently declared the end of the city's most influential alpha. Headlines called it the greatest organized crime arrest in decades. Social media celebrated. Investors abandoned Cross strategic holdings, and within hours nearly every law firm that had represented the company publicly announced it was terminating its contracts. Noah Whitmore watched the avalanche unfold from his office, surrounded by silent desks that had once buzzed with constant activity. Employees avoided eye contact as they hurried to collect personal belongings before leaving the building forever. The legal department's secure servers had been frozen under emergency authority, and even certified Omega professionals like Noah were warned that unauthorized access could result in the suspension of their licenses. The warning carried unusual weight in the Alpha and Omega legal system. An Omega's professional certification was not simply an employment document. It represented years of specialized training that allowed qualified Omegas to work safely inside executive Alpha environments without being automatically reassigned under protective labor statutes. Losing that certification would effectively end Noah's career. His phone vibrated again. Another anonymous message appeared. Walk away while you still have a future. Noah deleted it without replying. Less than 2 hours later, he arrived at the Metropolitan Detention Center carrying nothing except his identification badge and a leather folder. The correctional officer at the front desk looked surprised after reading the visitor request. "You are the only person who has asked to see him," she admitted quietly. "No family. No attorneys. No business associates." Noah simply nodded. That answer told him everything he needed to know. Everyone else had already assumed Damien was guilty. After passing multiple security checkpoints required for high-risk Alpha detainees, Noah entered the visitation room. A thick reinforced glass wall separated visitors from inmates. Moments later, Damien was escorted into the opposite chair. He wore a plain gray detention uniform instead of his usual tailored suits, yet somehow he still carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had intimidated boardrooms for years. He sat down calmly and lifted the receiver. Noah mirrored the movement. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Damien studied Noah with tired eyes before finally breaking the silence. "You should not be here." Noah ignored the remark. Everyone left. Damien gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "That was expected. Did you do what they are saying?" Noah asked carefully. Damien remained silent for several moments before answering in a voice so steady it almost sounded detached. "That question is no longer important." Noah frowned. "It is important to me." Damien leaned forward slightly. "Listen carefully. I need you to stop looking into this. Go home. Keep your license. Forget my phone call." "I cannot." Damien closed his eyes briefly, as though Noah's answer confirmed a fear he had already anticipated. "If you continue, you will become a target." Noah searched Damien's expression, hoping to find uncertainty, anger, or panic. Instead, he found only concern. Genuine concern directed entirely toward him. That realization unsettled him more than any accusation on television. "Why did you call me?" Noah asked softly. Damien looked toward the security camera mounted above the door before returning his gaze to Noah. "Because there was only one person I trusted to protect something more valuable than my freedom." Before Noah could ask another question, a correctional officer stepped inside and announced that the visit had ended. Damien stood immediately without resistance. As he was escorted toward the exit, he paused only once and spoke without turning around. "Whatever happens next, do not believe what they want you to see." Noah remained seated long after Damien disappeared behind the steel door. When he finally returned to the parking garage, He discovered the tires on his sedan had not been damaged, no threatening note had been left, and nothing appeared unusual. Yet tucked beneath his windshield wiper rested a small white envelope with no name written across the front. Inside was a single access card bearing the logo of Cross Strategic Holdings and one handwritten sentence. Locker B12. Before they find it first. Noah waited until nightfall before driving to the downtown storage facility listed on the access card. The building belonged to Cross Strategic Holdings, yet the government seizure order had not reached every auxiliary location. Locker B12 sat inside a secure records vault reserved for legal archives that required both biometric confirmation and a physical access credential. The card opened the first security door, but the second scanner recognized Noah's Omega professional license, allowing him to enter under emergency legal retention protocols established by Alpha and Omega employment law. The quiet hallway reminded him how deeply the legal system separated responsibilities by designation. Certified Omega legal officers were entrusted with preserving sensitive records precisely because they were considered independent custodians rather than executive decision-makers. That protection had once seemed like little more than another complicated regulation. Tonight, it became the only reason Noah could reach the locker before investigators sealed the building. Inside, he found a slim encrypted data drive, several printed legal files, and a sealed envelope marked with Damien's handwriting. The note contained only one instruction: trust verified records, never public evidence. Noah carried everything back to his apartment and connected the encrypted drive to an offline legal terminal he had purchased years earlier for confidential contract reviews. Layer after layer of authentication appeared before the files finally opened. Instead of financial records or criminal ledgers, the drive contained regulatory reports, court filings, executive compliance audits, and dozens of internal memoranda documenting repeated disputes between Cross Strategic Holdings and a government task force responsible for Alpha behavioral enforcement. Noah spent hours reading until one particular statute caught his attention. Another compliance provision immediately below, it described the Judicial Preservation Archive. Emergency communications involving licensed executive alphas could be mirrored automatically to an independent court-controlled server whenever criminal proceedings became reasonably foreseeable. Because the archive existed outside both corporate and prosecutorial control, very few people ever needed to access it. Noah read the regulation carefully before continuing. Under the Alpha and Omega Civic Protection Act, any alpha accused of using unlawful pheromone coercion while connected to organized criminal activity automatically lost the right to register a legal bond, even before trial, if prosecutors demonstrated probable cause. The restriction extended far beyond imprisonment. The accused alpha would be permanently classified as a high-risk dominant subject, barred from future bond registration, prohibited from supervising licensed Omegas, and stripped of multiple civil protections unique to alpha status. It was one of the harshest legal penalties in the country because lawmakers believed uncontrolled alpha influence represented a public safety threat. Noah leaned back in disbelief. None of the news reports had mentioned those consequences. Television commentators focused only on organized crime allegations while ignoring the fact that someone had carefully framed the accusations to trigger the most severe alpha-specific sanctions available under the law. He opened another folder containing incident timelines. Every official report referenced the mysterious 3 o'clock call as evidence that Damien had attempted to coordinate an escape after the explosion. Yet the phone records attached to the file felt strangely incomplete. The outgoing call duration matched Noah's memory almost perfectly, but the audio transcript began several seconds after Damien had already spoken. The first words in the official record were completely different from what Noah had actually heard. According to investigators, Damien's first sentence instructed an unidentified associate to destroy evidence. Noah knew that was impossible. He remembered every word clearly. Damien had said, "Do not call the police." Someone had altered the foundation of the entire case. Before Noah could continue reviewing the files, another document drew his attention. It authorized Special Prosecutor Elias Mercer to bypass ordinary judicial review because the defendant was classified as an alpha syndicate leader. Mercer had publicly built his career arguing that powerful alpha organizations manipulated society through inherited dominance rather than lawful leadership. His speeches frequently demanded stronger legal restrictions against alpha-controlled criminal networks, and he had become one of the nation's most recognizable advocates for aggressive prosecution. Noah could not ignore the timing. The altered transcript, the emergency legal classification, and the immediate suspension of Damien's civil rights all fit together too perfectly. This had been prepared long before the arrest ever occurred. Then his computer displayed one final encrypted folder that required a secondary authorization code. The hint beneath the password field contained only 4 words. Who answered the call? Noah stared at the screen as realization slowly settled over him. Damien had never called for legal advice. He had called Noah because Noah himself was the final key to unlocking whatever truth someone was desperately trying to bury. Noah barely slept before returning to the encrypted files, determined to answer the question Damien had left behind. He replayed every second of the phone call in his memory, comparing it with the altered transcript displayed on his screen. Someone had not merely edited the evidence. They had replaced the beginning of the conversation entirely. That level of manipulation required access to secure communications long before the investigation officially began. As dawn approached, Noah noticed an overlooked directory hidden beneath the executive compliance records. It contained maintenance logs for the company's internal surveillance network, including access histories for restricted archive rooms. One name appeared repeatedly during the week before Damien's arrest: Victor Hale. Officially, Victor served as Deputy Director of Operations, managing logistics across Strategic Holdings. Publicly, he presented himself as Damien's most loyal executive, often standing beside him during business announcements and charitable events. Internally, however, Victor's responsibilities did not include legal archives or encrypted communications. Yet according to the access records, he had entered those systems several times after regular business hours using emergency executive authority. Noah frowned as he compared the timestamps. Victor had accessed the archive less than 6 hours before the mysterious 3 o'clock call. Another file revealed that one surveillance camera overlooking the executive records vault had unexpectedly gone offline for exactly 14 minutes that same evening because of what technicians described as temporary signal interference. The timing was too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Noah expanded the maintenance report and found a still image automatically captured before the camera lost connection. The photograph showed a tall man wearing dark gloves as he approached the secured entrance. His face remained partially hidden beneath the angle of the security light, but one detail stood out immediately. The man wore a distinctive silver signet ring engraved with the Hale family crest. Noah had seen Victor wearing that ring countless times during board meetings. His pulse quickened. If Victor had entered the archive before Damien's arrest, then the missing communication records and altered transcripts suddenly made horrifying sense. Damien had not called Noah because he feared the authorities. He had called because Noah was the only person outside the executive circle with authorized access to an independent legal vault that could preserve untampered evidence. Damien had been trying to direct him toward protected records before someone intercepted whatever came next. Noah searched deeper and uncovered an unfinished memorandum drafted by Damien only hours before the arrest. Most of the document had been erased, but one surviving paragraph remained intact. It referenced an internal audit concerning unauthorized executive overrides and warned that a trusted officer had compromised multiple compliance systems. No name appeared, yet the attached reference number matched Victor's administrative department. Before Noah could examine the remaining files, his apartment buzzer sounded unexpectedly. A delivery courier handed him an unmarked envelope requiring no signature. Inside was a newspaper clipping featuring Damien's arrest alongside a single typed sentence. Some doors stay closed because opening them destroys everyone behind them. There was no return address, no fingerprints, only the unmistakable message that someone knew Noah had continued investigating. Instead of frightening him into retreat, the warning confirmed he was moving in the right direction. He secured the envelope inside his evidence folder and drove toward the courthouse, hoping to request certified copies of the original communication warrants before they disappeared as well. As he entered the public records office, he noticed a familiar face standing across the lobby. Victor Hale smiled politely from the opposite corridor, as though their meeting had been nothing more than an ordinary coincidence. For years, Victor had quietly opposed Damien's effort to transform Cross-Strategic Holdings into a legitimate corporation. Every legal reform reduced the influence of the underground network Victor secretly hoped to control himself. Damien's arrest had given him the opportunity he had been waiting for. He lifted one hand in a casual greeting before turning away without speaking. The smile lasted only a second, but it carried an unmistakable confidence. Victor already knew Noah was searching for the truth, and somehow he seemed completely certain that the truth would never reach the courtroom. The courthouse had become the center of every national headline, and Noah could feel the weight of countless eyes following him the moment he stepped inside. Reporters crowded every entrance, searching for the next dramatic image to feed an audience already convinced they understood the entire story. As a licensed Omega legal professional, Noah was accustomed to attracting occasional attention while accompanying high-profile alpha executives, but this was different. Whispers followed him through every hallway. Some questioned his loyalty, while others wondered why an Omega would continue defending a man the public had already condemned. Noah ignored every camera and focused on obtaining the original communication warrants before they disappeared into another sealed archive. His request was denied without explanation. Every document connected to Damien's case had been transferred under the authority of Special Prosecutor Elias Mercer, making independent review nearly impossible. As Noah turned away from the records counter, he noticed Victor Hale speaking comfortably with several senior executives from Cross-Strategic Holdings. Their conversation ended the moment Victor caught Noah's eye. Victor smiled with practiced confidence before walking away, leaving behind an unmistakable message that he still possessed influence throughout the organization despite Damien's arrest. Later that afternoon, Noah received official notice that his temporary access to the company's executive legal network had been permanently revoked. He no longer had authority to review internal files, communicate with executive staff, or represent the organization in any legal capacity. Within minutes, social media accounts began circulating anonymous claims that Noah had secretly assisted Damien in hiding confidential records before the arrest. No evidence accompanied the accusations, yet they spread rapidly across every major platform. Television commentators openly questioned whether Noah had been more than a trusted secretary. The rumors became increasingly personal, suggesting that Damien had granted Noah unusual privileges because of a hidden bond between them. In the Alpha and Omega community, such speculation carried serious consequences. Professional bonds required legal registration, strict consent verification, and extensive documentation. Claiming that a powerful Alpha had secretly maintained an unregistered bond with a licensed Omega implied violations that could destroy both reputations even without proof. Noah understood exactly why someone had chosen this narrative. If the public believed their relationship had been improper, then every action Noah took to uncover the truth would appear motivated by personal attachment instead of professional integrity. That evening, the court approved a preliminary hearing, allowing Damien to address procedural questions before the formal trial. Noah sat quietly among the observers as Damien entered the courtroom under heavy security. Despite days of relentless media pressure, Damien remained composed. Prosecutor Mercer presented the altered communication transcript as evidence that Damien had attempted to coordinate the destruction of critical records immediately before his arrest. Noah wanted to object, but he no longer possessed standing to speak. Then Mercer asked a seemingly harmless question. Did you personally contact anyone immediately before your detention? The courtroom became perfectly silent. Damien looked briefly toward Noah before returning his attention to the judge. Yes, he answered clearly. I called Noah Whitmore. Reporters began typing furiously. Before Damien continued, I called him because I trusted his judgment above everyone else. Gasps spread across the gallery. Mercer allowed the silence to linger, fully aware of how those words would be interpreted outside the courtroom. By evening, every news network repeated only part of Damien's statement, presenting it as confirmation that the Alpha leader had relied on his Omega secretary above all others. The speculation exploded. Commentators declared that the relationship had finally been exposed, while anonymous experts debated whether an undisclosed bond explained Noah's unwavering loyalty. The harassment became immediate. Protesters gathered outside Noah's apartment building carrying signs demanding that his professional license be revoked. Anonymous messages flooded his phone every few minutes, urging him to resign before the licensing board opened a disciplinary investigation. Yet beneath the growing pressure, one detail refused to leave Noah's mind. Damien had known exactly how his words would be twisted by the media, and he had spoken them anyway. For the first time since the arrest, Noah realized Damien had deliberately placed an even larger target on himself so that no one would notice the evidence Noah was still quietly gathering behind the headlines. The days that followed felt less like a legal battle and more like a carefully constructed maze. Every official path Noah attempted to follow ended behind another locked door, another missing record, or another procedural delay justified by emergency authority. If someone wanted the truth buried, they understood the legal system well enough to hide it in plain sight. Rather than fighting the barriers directly, Noah returned to the oldest archive maintained by the Omega Professional Licensing Bureau, a facility that stored historical employment certifications separately from corporate databases. Unlike company records, these archives could not be altered without leaving a permanent audit trail because they protected the employment rights of licensed Omegas throughout the state. An elderly records supervisor recognized Noah immediately and quietly granted him supervised access after confirming his credentials were still active despite the growing public controversy. Noah searched through thousands of digitized employment files until he reached the year he had first applied for executive certification. What he expected to find was an ordinary licensing history. Instead, he discovered an entire section marked as administratively sealed. The authorization that had sealed it carried a name that stopped him cold. Damien Cross. Confused, Noah requested permission to view the restricted material. The supervisor hesitated before explaining that sealed employment records involving Omega placement required executive authorization because they often contained information about protective interventions. After verifying Noah's identity through additional procedures, the archive released the documents. The first report revealed that years earlier, before Noah had ever joined Cross Strategic Holdings, his genetic compatibility profile had placed him on a government list for mandatory placement under the Assigned Bond Stabilization Program. Another handwritten note rested beneath the report, attached with an old legal review stamp. Noah carefully unfolded the yellowing page. Damien's familiar handwriting appeared across the bottom. If you are reading this after my arrest, then events unfolded exactly as I feared. Trust documents that cannot be rewritten, not people who can. Noah remained motionless for several seconds. The note had clearly been written years earlier, long before anyone could have predicted the events now unfolding. For the first time, he realized Damien had never simply hoped the truth would survive. He had quietly prepared for betrayal long before it ever arrived. The controversial program had been created to pair certain Omegas with approved Alpha Guardians whenever officials believed their long-term safety or economic stability required intervention. Although participation was presented as protective, many Omegas viewed it as a severe limitation on personal freedom because declining the assignment often meant losing access to specialized careers. Noah stared at the recommendation in disbelief. He had never known his application had reached that stage. The next document explained why the process had suddenly ended. Damien had personally filed a legal objection supported by independent employment guarantees, arguing that Noah qualified for executive legal work under professional supervision and therefore should retain full autonomy rather than being transferred into mandatory placement. Damien had offered corporate protections, financial assurances, and workplace compliance measures that exceeded government requirements. The appeal had succeeded. Noah had received his license without ever learning how close he had come to losing the ability to choose his own future. Another memorandum contained Damien's handwritten note to the licensing board. Professional capability must never be limited by designation alone. An Omega deserves the right to build a career before anyone decides what their life should become. Noah lowered the page slowly, realizing that the opportunity he had always believed he earned through determination alone had first been protected by someone who expected nothing in return. Damien had never mentioned the appeal during the 5 years they worked together. He had never asked for gratitude, loyalty, or recognition. He had simply allowed Noah to believe his future belonged entirely to him. That revelation changed everything. Until now, Noah had been investigating because he believed Damien had been framed. Now he understood there was another reason he could not walk away. Damien had quietly defended Noah's freedom long before either of them had become important parts of each other's lives. As Noah carefully returned the files to their protective sleeves, a notification appeared on his phone announcing that the court had advanced the trial schedule due to overwhelming public interest. The prosecution intended to present its complete case sooner than expected. Noah looked once more at Damien's handwritten words before placing the copies inside his evidence folder. The man the city insisted was beyond redemption had once used his influence not to control an Omega, but to preserve one Omega's right to make his own choices. Noah left the archive with a steadier resolve than ever before. Whatever waited inside that courtroom, he would no longer fight only to uncover the truth behind a single arrest. He would fight to protect the principle Damien had defended years earlier, because a society that claimed to protect Omegas could not allow the very laws designed for that purpose to become tools for deception. The morning the trial officially began, every seat inside the courthouse was filled long before the judge entered the room. Legal analysts, reporters, executives, and representatives from Alpha and Omega advocacy organizations gathered to witness what many were already calling the defining case of the decade. Noah walked through the crowded hallway carrying a single briefcase that contained every document he had managed to preserve. Although his authority to represent cross-strategic holdings had been revoked, the court had granted him permission to testify as both a fact witness and a certified Omega legal specialist, because several disputed procedures involved professional licensing regulations unique to Alpha and Omega law. The prosecution appeared completely confident. Elias Mercer opened the proceedings by repeating that Damien had abused the privileges granted to powerful alphas and had manipulated every institution around him. The presentation focused on financial records, executive authority, and the altered communication transcript that Noah already knew had been compromised. Yet Mercer carefully avoided mentioning the inconsistencies surrounding the original recording or the missing surveillance logs. When Noah was finally called to testify, the courtroom fell unusually quiet. Mercer questioned him first, attempting to portray his investigation as nothing more than emotional loyalty toward a disgraced employer. Noah answered each question calmly, explaining every action through documented legal procedures, certified archive access, and independently verified employment records. Every statement was supported by official documentation rather than opinion. The strategy frustrated Mercer, who quickly shifted to a different approach. He implied that Noah's judgment had been compromised because of an undisclosed personal attachment to Damien. Before Noah could respond, Victor Hale requested permission to address a procedural matter as the company's acting executive representative. Victor stepped forward with polished confidence, maintaining the same composed smile Noah had seen in the courthouse hallway days earlier. For weeks, every piece of evidence had moved exactly as Victor intended. The altered transcript had survived multiple legal reviews, Damien's reputation had collapsed overnight, and Noah had been dismissed as nothing more than a loyal secretary driven by emotion. In Victor's mind, the trial had already been decided long before it began. That confidence became his greatest weakness. Believing no one would dare question his authority inside a courtroom, he wore the modified device openly, convinced it would remain just another expensive executive accessory. He never imagined that an Omega legal specialist would recognize equipment most judges, attorneys, and reporters had never been trained to identify. As Victor approached the witness area, Noah noticed something unusual. Victor wore an expensive watch with a discreet metallic band unlike anything he had seen before. Attached beneath the clasp sat a nearly invisible device recognized immediately by anyone trained under executive workplace safety regulations. It resembled a prohibited pheromone amplification module, technology outlawed because it could artificially strengthen an alpha's natural influence inside enclosed environments. Most people in the courtroom would never recognize it, but Omega legal specialists received mandatory training on prohibited workplace equipment during professional certification. Noah requested permission to approach the evidence table. From his briefcase, he removed a compact compliance scanner designed for occupational safety inspections. The device had originally been created to protect licensed Omegas working in executive alpha environments by detecting unauthorized pheromone enhancement technology before confidential meetings began. Noah asked the judge for permission to conduct a routine compliance demonstration relevant to workplace regulations already discussed during testimony. After a brief conference, the request was granted. Noah activated the scanner. At first, the courtroom remained silent. Then a sharp electronic tone echoed through the chamber as the display flashed a bright warning indicating the presence of an illegal amplification frequency well above permissible legal limits. Every eye turned toward Victor. The judge immediately ordered court security to inspect the device attached beneath Victor's watchband. Victor attempted to remove it, but the inspection had already begun. Within minutes, the compliance officers confirmed that the accessory violated Alpha and Omega occupational safety statutes because it artificially enhanced alpha pheromone projection during professional interactions. Victor insisted he had no knowledge of the modification, yet the discovery instantly undermined his credibility. More importantly, it established something Noah had suspected from the beginning. If Victor had been willing to use prohibited alpha enhancement technology inside a courthouse filled with witnesses, then manipulating evidence during the weeks before Damien's arrest no longer seemed impossible. The revelation transformed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. Reporters stopped focusing on Damien and began documenting the unexpected compliance investigation unfolding before them. Even Prosecutor Mercer appeared unsettled as the judge ordered an immediate review of every piece of evidence connected to Victor's testimony. Noah remained standing beside the witness box, realizing that the carefully constructed narrative controlling the trial had finally begun to crack. For the first time since that unforgettable morning, the truth was no longer struggling to survive in secret. It had entered the courtroom where everyone could see it. The courtroom remained under recess while investigators examined the prohibited device recovered from Victor Hale. News organizations abandoned their prepared headlines and rushed to report the unexpected discovery. For the first time since Damien's arrest, public certainty gave way to doubt. No one knew, however, that exposing Victor's illegal equipment was only the beginning. It damaged Victor's credibility, but it did not yet prove Damien's innocence. The altered phone transcript still stood as one of the prosecution's strongest pieces of evidence. If that recording could not be disproved, the case could still end with the same devastating result. During the recess, Noah requested permission to review the chain of custody for every communication record submitted to the court. After the compliance violation, the judge authorized an independent forensic audit supervised by court technicians instead of the prosecution alone. Hours later, the specialists reported something no one had expected. The original audio file had never been destroyed. It still existed inside an encrypted emergency backup maintained automatically by the telecommunications provider under Alpha and Omega judicial preservation regulations. Because the communication involved a licensed executive Alpha under continuous legal monitoring, the system had created a protected archival copy beyond the reach of ordinary investigators. No one had requested it until now. The courtroom filled again as the restored recording was transferred into the evidence system. Every conversation stopped when the judge authorized its playback. The first sounds matched Noah's memory perfectly. Quiet breathing, distant traffic, then Damien's unmistakable voice. "Noah, do not call the police." Noah closed his eyes briefly. Those were the exact words he had remembered from the beginning. The recording continued beyond the point where the public transcript had abruptly changed. Damien spoke again, his voice controlled despite obvious urgency. "Someone is using counterfeit bond authentication signals to lure Alpha executives into a trap. The secure archive contains the verification keys. Protect the records before anyone changes them." A metallic sound interrupted his sentence. "If they erase the verification files, they can blame anyone they choose." The call ended exactly as Noah remembered, cutting off before Damien could explain further. Silence spread across the courtroom. The restored recording shattered the foundation of the prosecution's timeline. Damien had not been coordinating a cover-up. He had been trying to preserve evidence. Connected to a sophisticated fraud that depended entirely on Alpha and Omega identity systems. The counterfeit bond authentication signals were impossible outside the Omegaverse legal framework because they exploited the government registry used to verify lawful Alpha and Omega pairings, executive access privileges, and protected workplace permissions. Without that system, the entire scheme could never have existed. Court technicians immediately compared the restored recording with the version submitted into evidence. Large sections had been removed and replaced with fabricated dialogue. The manipulation occurred after the emergency backup had been created, but before prosecutors received the official transcript. Attention shifted toward everyone who had handled the file during that narrow window. Victor's administrative authorizations appeared repeatedly throughout the audit trail. Faced with the forensic results, several digital evidence specialists acknowledged irregular access requests that had previously been dismissed as routine executive maintenance. Prosecutor Elias Mercer slowly lowered the altered transcript resting on his desk. "Your Honor," Mercer said quietly, "every certified record presented to my office appeared authentic under established verification procedures. If this evidence was altered, then my prosecution was manipulated as well." For the first time since the trial began, his voice carried regret instead of certainty. His confidence disappeared as he realized the investigation itself had been manipulated. The judge ordered the fraudulent recording removed from evidence and instructed independent authorities to begin a criminal inquiry into the tampering of judicial records. Damien remained seated quietly beside his attorneys, saying nothing as the courtroom absorbed the truth. Noah looked across the room and met Damien's eyes for only a moment. No words were exchanged, yet both understood that the phone call from before dawn had finally been heard exactly as it had happened. The warning Damien had tried to deliver had survived every attempt to erase it, and with the restored recording now preserved before the court, the carefully constructed deception that had hidden behind altered evidence was beginning to collapse under the weight of undeniable facts. Several weeks later, the final ruling echoed through a packed courtroom that had witnessed every unexpected turn of the case. After reviewing the restored recording, the independent forensic audit, the unauthorized alterations to judicial evidence, and the verified access records, the court dismissed every criminal charge against Damien Cross. A separate investigation confirmed that Victor Hale had exploited executive authority to manipulate protected files while pursuing control of Cross Strategic Holdings, and additional proceedings were opened against everyone involved in the evidence tampering. Prosecutor Elias Mercer addressed the court before the proceedings concluded, acknowledging that his office had relied upon compromised material without knowing it had been falsified. Although the admission could not erase the damage already done, it marked the beginning of sweeping reforms requiring independent verification whenever Alpha and Omega registry data became central evidence in criminal cases. Damien stepped out of the courthouse without handcuffs for the first time since that unforgettable morning. Reporters surrounded him, expecting anger, revenge, or triumphant declarations. Instead, he offered only a brief statement. Justice is strongest when the truth belongs to everyone, not the most powerful person in the room. He answered no further questions before quietly walking away. Noah waited near the courthouse steps, holding the same leather folder that had accompanied him through every hearing. Damien approached with an expression Noah had never seen before. The confidence remained, but the constant weight behind his eyes had finally begun to disappear. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Damien simply looked toward the city skyline before saying, "You ignored every instruction I gave you." Damien smiled faintly. "I also knew you probably would. That's why I left more than one path for the truth to survive." Noah looked at him in silence, finally realizing the locker, the compliance files, and every preserved record had never been random precautions. Damien had been preparing for betrayal long before the first arrest warrant was ever signed. Noah smiled for the first time in weeks. Only the ones that would have left the truth buried. Damien let out a quiet laugh. "I suppose I should have expected that." During the months that followed, Cross Strategic Holdings underwent a transformation few people believed possible. Damien voluntarily dissolved every remaining operation connected to the old syndicate structure and reorganized the company into a fully regulated security and risk management organization operating under expanded public oversight. Independent compliance officers, including representatives from Alpha, Beta, and Omega professional associations, were invited to supervise executive policies to ensure transparency. Noah accepted Damien's invitation to become Chief Legal and Ethics Officer, overseeing the very compliance systems that had once been manipulated against them. Together, they helped draft new workplace standards protecting licensed Omegas from professional retaliation while strengthening safeguards against the misuse of alpha authority. Legislators later incorporated several of those recommendations into statewide reforms governing executive employment and digital verification procedures. Their work became known less for correcting one wrongful prosecution than for restoring public confidence in an alpha and omega legal framework that had nearly been exploited beyond recognition. Nearly a year after the trial ended, Damien invited Noah to the newly renovated headquarters. Inside the main entrance stood a small glass display unlike the awards and corporate achievements surrounding it. Resting alone beneath soft lighting was an ordinary mobile phone, preserved exactly as it had been recovered after the investigation. A small plaque beneath the display read, "One unanswered moment can change the future. One honest choice can change it again." Noah looked at the familiar device and remembered the uncertainty, the fear, and the impossible decision that had begun everything. Damien turned toward him with complete sincerity. "Years ago, I protected your freedom, because I believed every Omega deserved the right to choose a future without pressure. Today, I have only one question, and there is no expectation attached to it." Noah already knew what Damien meant before another word was spoken. Their decision to register a legal bond came months later after careful reflection, independent counseling, and every safeguard required by Alpha and Omega law, not because either of them owed the other anything, but because both freely chose the life they wanted to build together. The city would always remember the courtroom, the investigation, and the scandal, yet those who truly understood the story remembered something much simpler. In the end, the most important evidence was never hidden inside a vault or preserved on a recording. It was the courage of two people who refused to let power, fear, or prejudice decide what the truth should become. What would you have done if you were in this situation? Tell us in the comments. If you love Alpha and Omega stories filled with passion, loyalty, heartbreak, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.